I remember the government of India sent a delegation saying that, look, we would like to export some of our machinery and try and help, in whatever we can in development of Uganda's economy. And the minister came here and they asked, what can we do for you? And they said, we want 4 sugar factories in different parts of Uganda, one in the east, one in the west, one in the north, one in the south. Very good. At that time, while India could export machinery, they were not able to finance the foreign exchange, because India itself was short of foreign exchange. So ultimately, they said, we give you machinery, but rest of the work we'll have to do. I took up the challenge and I said, look, we can build 30-40% of the machinery here in Uganda and Yugma. We started Yugma by that time. And rest of the machinery can come from India. And we were able to raise the finance for it as well, from the international agencies. And that was the time we laid the foundation stone of Kinyara. That was built by us in collaboration with the Balchanagar. It was the first time they exported machinery from India to Uganda. It was the first exports in the history of India, which was Kinyara. And after that we had the quit orders, so we had to leave the country. But they completed the plant. It was never commissioned till everybody came back. One thing he has always believed, his father also, my great-grandfather was very, very religious person. And he always believed that what you earn, you got to give back to the society. That is one of the reasons why we have here today, unlike the new factories which have come. We've got housing for all the staff we employ here, free housing, free medical treatment, 1 cooked meal in the day. Then the night, we give them certain amount of food. They cook themselves.
We are employing 7,000 workers and 35,000 family members. They are living on our estate, and to all of them we are giving free medicines, expertise, treatment, and those who are serious, they are sent to Kampala or Jinja at our cost for treatment. Then we have got our education, schools. We have got 1 secondary school, about 11 primary schools within our. They are all situated in plantation also, and here also.
Newcomers coming from India, they don't have permanent employer. They take the casual labor. They don't have housing for the staff. But we believed right from the beginning that you look after the people. That's one of the reasons you asked me, why do you don't have any grills in your house? It's an open house. I think it's a goodwill. People don't come and try to steal anything from the house, because they know that if they want something badly, if they are in difficulties and trouble, we are there to help them out. So far, only after, during the chaos, after, a group of people came when we were not here and took away everything. Curtain, furniture, table, chairs, everything was gone. And they reported to me when I was in India that people have come and burglared the house. I said, well, what can we do? They come with AK-47 rifle and there's nothing you can do. Next day they came again. And they said, what do you want now? We have taken everything, there's no furniture left in the house, no television, nothing left in the house. They said, no, we come back. Our chief told us that in all the houses in Uganda, did you have to go and loot Meta's house? And go and put everything back. So every piece of furniture was put back, even hanging curtains, they came back, all the curtains. They apologized and went back, I mean, that was the kind of goodwill we enjoyed in this country, Well, all this, the life was difficult in the sense, that some of the land which we developed was virgin land next to the forest, Mabera forest. Wildlife used to come at night. Even as children, in those days, we didn't have the flush toilet. We had to go outside in a pit latrine. And going outside, we used to be afraid because we roars of lions, and we saw often pythons coming from the plantations. We saw a lot of wild cats, the buffaloes coming, wild buffaloes coming on the estate. That was the condition in those days. But as far as people were concerned, in this region at least, they were very friendly, hardworking. And in those days we didn't have all the facilities. Supervisors used to go on a donkey with about 100 donkeys. So they would go on the donkey, ride the donkey, go to the far off estate, supervise the population going on. But country was still pleasant. Climate was pleasant. I mean, this country is blessed by nature. Where do you find climate like this, greenery like this, evergreen country? So that continued. But in the other parts of Uganda, particularly in the Teso and all those areas, there were difficult situations. It was not that well developed. But our labor used to come, most of the people, harvesting used to come from the north, from Lukwaras and Langis and Amin's tribe, what is it called? Mostly northerners because they were more strongly built and harvesting was suitable for them. And intercultivation was then. Most of the Bagandas didn't work on the estates because they had their own sambars, growing matoke, it was subsistence farming, they were quite happy. But northerners came to work here mostly, and then people from Rwanda were coming here to work, doing light work in the fields. But otherwise, the situation was pleasant, we were children here growing up, going around. In those days, only cane used to come in the estate railway. We had about 100 miles of estate railway for collecting the cane. So we used to sometimes have a ride, in the locomotive or wood-fired locomotive. See, you laid the main railway line, and then you had portable line which you connected as it went from field to field. But the main line was there from all directions. And we had something like 1,000 people working on the railway for the transport only in those days. I'm talking about during my childhood days. Thereafter, 1952, we introduced the road transport and loading of the mechanical loading because labor was short. Site prices are very high. after the Korean War, during the Korean War. And most of the laborers used to be recruited in Tanzania. They were sending planes to recruit the laborers, to work on they were paying for double the salaries than we could pay. So that's the time we were compelled to mechanize. And thereafter, mechanical loading, transporting directly, fields going into the trucks going into the field has become a normal practice. But that mechanization was introduced first by our company, then later on it was adopted by many others. Some of the trucks, trailers. Yeah. The trailers, some of them were built by us. We copied the designs which were developed in Hawaii to start with. Subsequently, we introduced another mode of transport. By lighter tractors and trailers would go inside the field. So you didn't have to do double transport, take it from the field into the loading station and then bring it here. But as I told you earlier, we had built up the workshop, Jikma workshop, which did all the rollers, and about 40% of the machinery required in the boiling house was manufactured here. And at the time of Bote, I went to him and I said, "Sir, we built these engineering works. Now, you are trying to give this factory contract to Buko Brothers. Give us an opportunity to build this factory." He said, "Look, I give you 30 days. You come up with your quotations." In 30 days we worked day and night and gave the whole project report, whole financial scheme. And he said, "Okay, go ahead." This is how we developed Kinyara. And by the time we left, Kinyara plantation was developed, housing was ready, structures were ready, machinery was on site. It was not commissioned, But it was great experience, and that experience helped me a great deal after leaving the country with 2 suitcases during Amin's time. It's all right, we have lost our assets, but we still have our know-how, still we have goodwill in the world. And then we used that experience to build several sugar projects in different parts of Africa and up to Canada, and did a lot of consultancy in sugar management contracts. We built 2 factories in Kenya, which are still existing, Sony Sugar and the Moroni Sugar. We built the power alcohol plant there. We did a lot of consultancy work in Sudan, supplied a lot of machinery also. So that experience helped us in establishing or rebuilding the group. After when we left here, we didn't have much money outside. At that time, our Indian companies were also in difficulties. The textile mill was going through crisis. Cement was just started. So I had decided, that I'll go all over, use whatever knowledge I've acquired to build the projects, for the government in joint sector or in public sector, whatever was desired. And as a matter of fact, when we came back, by that time I had rebuilt the group to its earlier size, in terms of turnover and the assets, But Uganda had a special place in my heart, I had to, when once invited, we had to come. And I decided to stay for the rest of my life here. but we have businesses now in India in several different lines. We are in cement, we are in entertainment, we are in tourism, we are in sports. So that's that. But Uganda still is my first love. See, at that time, socialism was spreading very fast on the continent of Africa. After Nyerere, you had the Mozambique, and you had the Angola, and Ethiopia, and Rwanda, and Burundi were thinking on the same line, of nationalizing industries. And in my opinion, either British and Americans didn't want that to happen, particularly the British, because they had large stake in Kenya. And they didn't want Kenya to be surrounded by so many socialistic states around them. So, in fact, they encouraged. There were Israelis, which were special commandos training the, as you know, all presidents have special commandos, for the protection of the president. They were the army. These are special commandos, they have special equipment, they are specially trained to use special weapons, for the protection of the president. And Amin was in charge of that. About events to Commonwealth Conference in Singapore. The Israelis had planned it earlier. They would take over, or ask Amin to take over. And Amin was promoted, because, in my opinion, and I think a lot of people who have studied the history, recent history of how this development took place, Amin was promoted because Obote feared that all the Sanders-trained officers, during the British time, might be politically more ambitious, and they might want to take over, have a coup, because there were so many coups on the continent of Africa at that time. Normally, army was taking over. So he feared that. That's why he scattered all these Sanders officers, from the army. They gave them civil jobs, into parastatal, etc., etc. As ambassadors or head of parastatal organization, good positions they were given. And Amin, who was very popular with the army, they promoted him to that level. So Amin thought, Obote thought that Amin was half educated, popular with the army, and he will not be aspiring to take over the country and rule the country, But he was encouraged by the Israelis had the key, to the armory. It was handed over to him, all the weapons, It was a bloodless coup. He declared that Obote did not come back. I have taken over the government. Maybe one or two people were shot dead, but nothing more than that. Killing started afterwards. I mean, this is the history which I've lived in, during that time. I've been associated with Uganda, with the politics, what was happening at that time. This was my reading. That I don't think Amin really wanted to take over. Till he was encouraging us to look at the people nationalizing everything. Nationalization, I don't think was suitable for Uganda. If you saw Uganda's economy depended on the agriculture mostly. Revenue depended on 3 T's in 3 C's: tea, tobacco, tourism, cotton, coffee, copper. Sugar was a small part in the production. And if you went around, which I used to do, you found a lot of landowners, sitting there. They've developed the sambars with matoke, coffee, cassava, and they're having their cuckoos and their buzis, and 2 or 3 wives working in the samba. Now you tell them that, like Tanzania, you have to share your land with your neighbor. Basically, it was not acceptable. They were not ready for that situation. And relatively, in this country, nobody starved. Food was easy to get. To the extent that if you got rid of somebody, you will work on samba 2 or 3 days and you'll get his food. That was the situation. To introduce socialism, which was something unheard of by them, or never experienced before, it didn't suit them. They never wanted that. But idealists wanted to introduce that. So this is how Amin came into power, and Amin got rid of Obote by taking over the country during his absence. And it was later on, from what I knew of him, he was born on my estate. And I have taken salutes from Amin quite often. He told me Bana Mehta. So after that, after shops were taken over by the local people without much experience as to how to run the business, continuous sort of foreign exchange. And he went to Saudi Arabia to ask for money, help. Saudi said, you came in power with the help of Zionists and you're coming to an Arab country. He said, what shall I do? He said, get rid of them. So within 1 week, most of the Israelis were asked to leave. There were 600, 700 of them. Thereafter, again, money was finished. Taxation was not working properly. Industries were out, importation were not there, so excise duty, import duty, very little revenue was coming to the government. So only thing he was doing at the time was maintaining the army barracks and flights to come with the special food for the army to keep them happy. Thereafter, it became more and more difficult for him, and he became more and more suspicious about people trying to overthrow him, particularly people who were loyal to the previous regime, and started killing people. A lot of people used to be picked up from our estate also, and they disappeared, nobody knows how. Then subsequently he went to Libya. And it was the time when he went to Libya that my wife had delivered her second child in London. And while he was in Libya, there was a decree that no former member of parliament could leave the country without his permission. So the acting president would not give me permission to leave. He said, I can't, I don't have authority. There were no mobile phones in those days, And in any case, telephone lines were not working, and Gaddafi never stayed in one place. I had met Gaddafi, I knew Gaddafi well, but bring different tents every day because his life was under threat by the Americans and the other powers. So he learned there that he got rid of all the foreigners, handed over the properties to the local people, and thereafter his country was happy. But he got that inspiration that, well, he can do the same. He forgot the fact that Libya had large reserves of oil. Money was in abundance. And there was no question of country starving to death without money. So he came and did the same thing, get rid of all the foreigners. When he came back, I went to see him and I said, look, my daughter, just newly born daughter, has got medical problem. And my wife is desperately calling me. He said, who stopped you? I said, you're acting president. Beta have koina. So that night I left. And the announcement came that all foreigners must leave. We were citizens of the country. Subsequently realized that about 50-60% of the Indian population here had Uganda nationality. So second announcement came that all non-indigenous people must quit. And that's how, that means everybody had to quit, who didn't have this kind of hair or dark skin. And that was that. But it's a sad story. I think, colonial powers also did their, they had a role in doing all this, what happened, it was not just, environment was, we lived in fear. When Madhvani was arrested, my house was also surrounded by the army. And I thought, he will take me next, for no reason. I just wanted to set an example that I can arrest Madhvani or I can arrest Mehta. Nothing is above the power that I have. And after a couple of hours, by the time I heard the news that he was, Madhvani was arrested and taken to prison, Manubai. So after a couple of hours, while I was sitting there, it surrounded the place, I was trying to contact somebody in Entebbe as to why this army has surrounded this place. But then after a couple of hours, the head came, and I said, what are you doing? Why have you surrounded both the houses? He said, no, we're just trying to protect you. And in fact, Aminat sent a message not to touch me. And in fact, he asked me that you continue even after, when I came back after expulsion order, he said, you stay here, you continue. But on the last day I got the message that I must quit, This is on the 89th day. I had the final message to quit. That was the story. Opan also was a transporter. And the only place you could go and buy something, he used to supply a lot of things to the army. And with the devaluation of the currency, you had to go with a bag like this, full of notes, to be able to buy simple things, like households and all that. And he had to go down, it was full of notes, put in the sacks. And then we were 30 people counting notes. That was the situation at that time. Askari knocked on my door and said, some people wanting to see you. I said, who are they? He said, they're soldiers. I thought maybe it's on the last day of 90th day, maybe they want to take me to prison. I didn't know what to do. So I took both of them and I came out, in my dressing gown. In 1848, I was in that house, that house. You see the porch? They were in that porch, standing there in the porch, 10 of them, like a 47 rifle, pointing at the door. So I said, good morning. He said, good morning, sir. I said, what can I do for you? He said, have you received President's message? It came previous night that I must quit also. It came on BBC that I have been given quit orders. So he said, have you received President's message? I said, yes, but I've got to have the income clearance certificate on one side, and then have the booking, apply for the foreign exchange, have booking, get the tickets now, and then go. So then he seemed to know everybody. Like many of the people I met these days, they say, oh, we studied at your place, or your father gave me scholarship to study, or we've studied in your school. Even I had studied in our school earlier. So he said, no, you don't know me well, but I know very well because my father was working here, I was born here. I was educated in your school. After that, you gave me scholarship to go abroad. I came back and joined the army. Very good. They asked about my mother, they asked about my newly born child. He asked about my brother, his wife, He knew everybody's name, by first name he knew everybody in the family. And then they all lined up, and said that, I'm sure, instead of arresting me, they saluted me and said, one day will come back, So best of luck. So that was that day I went to the airport, and there were heaps and heaps of luggage left by the people who left, and there again the custom officers were all soldiers, with bayonets, Kujapa, So then they said, this is Mehta. I said, oh, Mehta Maniami. Again, most of the northerners knew because they were all working here on sugar estate. So he said, oh, my brother was working for you in Lukazi. So he took me to VIP lounge instead of asking me to wait there. My baggage was cleared, but by the time I thought the plane would have gone, but fortunately it was 2 hours late. So I could catch the plane. In those days, planes used to come from London to Entebbe to Nairobi. So that is the flight I took. And there, my wife and my son had seen us at the airport, and Moy, I knew Moy very well, so he had made arrangements. Normally, no expelled Indian from this place was allowed to land in Kenya. But in our case, since we had investments in Kenya, gave me special permission, but they say, don't make any announcement, go quietly to the VIP lounge and maintain low profile. I said, okay. So that was it. You see, I think Bruce Mackenzie, Bruce Mackenzie, yeah. Well, he was a very powerful man, appointed, even by Kenyatta and subsequently by Moy in the ministry. And Minister of Agriculture. So I had a lot of dealings with him. And firstly we fought, then he became my friend. Politically he was influential, and he was instrumental in allowing the Israelis to refuel the plane when they came to relieve the people who were captured, by all passengers of the aircraft were captured by the soldiers. And got to know about that. So he was playing tricks with him. Before he bought some of the equipment supplied by him. By the time he left the government, but he was doing the business of supplying the armament, ammunition. And I told him, I said, why are you doing this? Find out some other ways of earning money, but why do you have to sell? But he says, if I don't, somebody else will sell. Business is business. So he used to fly, sometimes alone, sometimes with a passenger, with one of his friends. Then let him go to State House, make a deal with Amin. So on that occasion, when he was killed, probably it was few months after Israeli raid, which humiliated Amin to a certain extent, that I mean, within few hours, they liberated all the people who were imprisoned by Amin, he said. And he wanted to make a bargain with them that unless you do this and this for me, will not release your passengers. That hope disappeared with the help of Israelis, who raided, liberated all these people. So that day he came to make a deal with Amin. Probably made a deal. I don't know whether he made a deal or didn't. But when he was going back, Amin sent a message while he was about to embark on his own plane. He was waiting in the plane. Amin said, I'm sending some presents for you. He sent, I think a leopard skin, leopard mouth, but the bomb in that, time bomb. So he said, I put it at the back, not knowing what it contained. So by the time they reached Gonga Hill in Nairobi, it exploded. And that was the end of him. His wife told me, I said, I wish he'll listen to your advice. Too late by the time. The sugar factory here was in chaos, absolutely. Machinery was broken, there were no spare parts available, no foreign exchange available. Nobody was prepared to give the loan at that time to Uganda. Ultimately, gradually, they could manage to persuade people to give a loan. And we got loan from 6 institutions. The World Bank, African Development Bank, the Kuwaiti Fund, then we had Badia, which is Arab Bank for African Development. They still have the headquarters in, I think, in Ivory Coast before. And the Exim of India. So there were 6 institutions, out of which 3 had IFC, CDC, and the third one, they'd given direct loan. IFCDC and Exim Bank of India had given direct loan. Then they made a consortium against the security of the land, building and assets of Sukkur Corporation. But they'd given about $20 million. Total loan was about $80 million to rehabilitate this place.
Then we took further, we started talking to different institutions. So we took a loan of $23 million for rehabilitation of the plant. And we modernized it. You will see it today. And the whole thing was completed in 2014. The whole plant is running very. Now we are producing 120,000 tons of sugar per year. You can imagine from 300 tons, we took it now to 120,000 tons of sugar per year. And now we have put up a distillery for making alcohol neutral, super refined, extra neutral alcohol, which is used for making whiskey, gin, vodka, potable liquors. But we are not doing that. We are only making the raw material and selling to people. Locally, we are exporting to not only Zambia, Burundi, Rwanda, and Congo, South Sudan.
Impossible to pay. So ultimately, government appointed Warburg, who came and made a study of the total commitment of the Uganda government, foreign loans. And they were all settled at about 15%. And in that process, we only let government from African Development Bank, then the Kuwaiti Fund, Badia, those are the major loans they were written off by the government. Even then we were left with $30 million ultimately to be settled with IFC, CDC and Exim Bank, which we completed, 2002? When did we complete the loan repayment?
2008.
2008. Made them debt free. But it was a Herculean task. Fortunately, I mean, all the presidents were good to us in the sense, that they were ready to support us, knowing that we have a commitment in this country. We regard this as our country. And country's problem is also our problem. We are part of it. So they all helped. And when Mussolini took over, he went out of the, every month he used to come here and say, look, what's your problem? What is the progress? Let us know if you have any problems. And so when Mussolini took over, I went to see him. And I said, he said, I'm busy, come next week. He sent a message, So I said, I'll go back to Nairobi. And we were at the airport, and he was waiting for Janet to come from Sweden. So I sent him a note to know that I'm here while you're waiting. I'm also waiting, my plane was also late. So he said, come over. He looked at me, are you the Mehta? I said, I'm Mahendra Mehta, I don't know what the Mehta. I said, what is the role of people like us in Mussolini's government? He said, you read my book? I said, yes. I'm a socialist? I said, yes. But I said, the degree of socialism varies from country to country. In some countries, socialism means complete nationalization. In some countries, it means working together with governments, joint sectors. He said, to me, anybody who works for the country is socialist. Anybody who pays taxes, is socialist. Anybody who saves foreign exchange is socialist. Anybody who creates employment in the country is a socialist. I said, by that definition, we can count me as a socialist. They laughed and we laughed, And after that, our relationship started.
When Museveni came, 1986, he laid the foundation stone. And 88, we rehabilitated the whole plant at a new site. It was started. There was a condition that we will not be invest even a single dollar for capital expenditure. So we could not do any investment till their loan is paid. And we took the loan when shilling was 52 shilling to $1. at that time. But there was no option. 14% interest on dollar at that time and quarterly compounding. So those conditions were very, very difficult. Anyway, we managed to clear all the loans.
And he made very, very pro-industry, pro-investment. One day, and we should discuss a lot of issues now, how to rebuild the economy, etc. What other things can be introduced. I said, unless you commercialize your agriculture and prepare the final product rather than just supply raw material. I mean, all colonial governments, had that philosophy, They want the raw material to go from developing countries, produced by the hard work of the poor people, and then converted into something, which fetched about 10 times the price, than the raw material they got from the developing countries. That was a colonial pattern world over. I mean, India, they exploited India. I mean, probably the Belgians were the worst in exploiting the people, in Congo, etc. If you went to see the condition there, very badly treated. Anyway, but that apart, he said two things we differed while discussions. He said we must have a very large population. I said we are having, at that time there were 10 million people in Uganda. Today there were 45. Yeah. So we had increased 3.5% every year. I said, unless we have enough resources to provide for these people, the young people, like the educational facilities, housing, medical treatment, employment opportunities, these are basic things young generation wants. Even those are not, if not available, it can be. Can spread a lot of dissatisfaction amongst the people. But you see, unless we have big market, big population, we can't attract big industries. That's why we are very keen to have a East African Common Market. We initiated that with very good intentions, but it's not worked as well as it should have worked.